Welcome to Class 2 of the SEO Bootcamp series where we're discussing keyword research. In this module, we're going to talk about how to evaluate keywords. We've talked about search visibility and its importance related to keyword analysis. We've discussed briefly how to organize keyword research, some of the different frameworks you can use there. And once we've populated that research framework, now we want to go in and actually say, well, how do we evaluate some of these keywords? Then we'll jump into, once we have an understanding of decent metrics for each individual keyword, how to create lists and the importance of lists to identify very compelling variants. So let's dive in here. How to evaluate keywords. We're going to be talking about this using Keyword Explorer, that you can use any keyword analysis tool. Just kind of keep in mind some of the different overarching concepts that we discuss when talking about keywords specifically. So here's the Keyword Explorer interface. We have a search window here. You can choose the country that you're looking at. You can also search by either keyword, site, subdomain, or individual URL. And then we have these lists down below, and again, we'll cover these lists in another module. This is located, if you go to the drop-down in Moz Pro, you can select Keyword Explorer, and that'll take us to this page. Let's use this example here where we use a keyword for dental implants. Imagine that we are a dentist or an orthodontist, and we are investigating different ways to sort of attract people to our site using the keyword dental implants. When I select dental implants and hit the search button, that takes me to this keyword overview. You can see keyword overview is selected over here, and this is really the keyword overview section here at the top. Keyword suggestions down below, we could click on this and take it to the keyword suggestions. SERP analysis here would take us to the search engine result page analysis tool, and likewise these sidebar elements would do that as well. But let's take a look at these elements in the keyword overview section. Okay, so we have monthly volume. Okay, monthly volume shows the low and high end of monthly volume, and this is purely the estimates of how often this search query, the search string, gets queried each month. Okay, so monthly volume, pretty straightforward, 30,000 to 70,000. Now, Moz pulls its volume metrics from several different sources and assesses those, and where we don't have a high degree of confidence, we won't display a monthly volume. So if there is no monthly volume showing, that doesn't mean that there isn't monthly volume. It just means that Moz doesn't have a high degree of confidence in the metrics that we have that we're pulling from those sources. The next metric here is difficulty score. This is a very important one. Difficulty score is a 1 to 100 scale that estimates the challenge that you're going to face when trying to rank for this keyword. The difficulty score is made up of, or assesses, the other sites that show up in those search results. So if we look at the SERP analysis down here below, we can see the top 3 results that show up on the search engine result page, including the page authorities of that URL and the domain authority of the related domain. So where we have highly competitive keywords, we would expect to see that our difficulty score is quite high. So here, difficulty scores 1 to 100, higher numbers, more challenging. And if you really want to sort of dig in and get some framework around what might be good or bad, you could say, single digits, low teens, very, very low scores. The 20s and 30s difficulty scores, those are starting to get a little bit more competitive, and 30s and 40s probably quite competitive, and certainly things in the 50s and 60s are very competitive. So when you see numbers like this, you can tell 68 is will be quite challenging. The caveat here is, what is your authoritativeness? So if you are, in this example, Colgate, who has a domain authority of 83, and your page that you're attempting to optimize here has a page of 72 already, well, this might not be that difficult. If you are a startup or new business trying to disrupt the dental implant business, and your page authority and domain authority are 1, well, then this number obviously would be quite challenging. So keep that in mind. This is relevant as it is to your position in the market. The next figure we have is organic click-through rate, expressed as a percentage, so in essence, also on a 1 to 100 scale. The organic click-through rate takes into account the presence of SERP features. Where there are a lot of SERP features, such as map packs, ads, featured snippets, and all the other non-organic stuff that's on the page, where there's a lot of that will tend to degrade the click-through rate. So if you want to find keywords where you have a higher likelihood of actually getting that click and having the visitor not be dissuaded by those other SERP features, a higher likely organic click-through rate is better. So here, lower numbers, not as good, higher numbers, better. Difficulty score, lower numbers, better, higher difficulty scores make it more challenging. Okay? And then a priority score. A priority score takes into account the monthly volume, difficulty, and organic click-through rate scores and gives you a 1 to 100 scale that you can use to compare in a like term to other keywords. Here, obviously, higher numbers would be better. Okay, so we can see here, a higher priority score of 74 is made up of the fact that this is a very high volume keyword. However, it's slightly degraded. Why isn't it 100? Well, it's slightly degraded by the fact that difficulty score very high and the organic click-through rate tends to be kind of low. If you can think about organic click-through rates, maybe 80, 85 and above are good scores there. So you can see the degradation there of the priority score. So let's look at a couple of examples here of how you can interpret these different figures against one another. So let's use this dental implants figure as our starting point, and we'll look at an example. So here we have two different keywords: dental implants cost and dental implants prices. Now we could look at these two keywords from the standpoint of Hummingbird, who's assessing things on the semantic similarity, and we could probably say that cost and prices would be interpreted as having the same or nearly identical search intent, right? These two words are basically synonyms of one another, and yet look at the differences between the results here. Dental implant cost, at the low end, 11,500 monthly volume, 32 difficulty, 55% organic click-through rate. So we have pretty decent volume, marginally low difficulty score, and kind of a not so great organic click-through rate. If we look at dental implants prices, monthly volume, 500 to 850, relatively the same difficulty score, so kind of an okay difficulty score. And then organic click-through rate also quite degraded. If we compare these two, if I have to say which is the better variant between these two words, given that difficulty scores and organic click-through rate scores are basically being held constant here, I would look at it and say, well, all things being equal, this one has more volume, so therefore dental implants cost is the better keyword. Here we have variants that are nearly identical semantically, and yet look at the difference between those volume scores. We have, as search engine optimization experts, the choice of words, and words do matter. And we would assume that if we can create content that ranks well for cost, that, Hummingbird might interpret the same thing as it being like, well, this is also valuable content for dental implants prices. Okay, let's look at another example. So here we'd say cost is better, the upper one. So let's look at this example here. Leaving dental implants, if you will. First version, home insurance rate calculator. And then here is basically a synonym to this, home insurance premium calculator. We've switched out the word rate for premium, and both those two things semantically are basically the same concept, right? So Hummingbird might view those similarly. And let's look at our results. Monthly volume, 11 to 50. Difficulty score, 45, which is, again, kind of getting a little higher there. Organic click-through rate, not so great, right? 54%. That means that there's a lot of stuff that's showing up on the page, SERP features and whatnot. Here, monthly for home insurance premium calculator, 11 to 50. See, so similar. Difficulty of 40, so kind of in the same ballpark. But our organic click-through rate is 84%. So again, if I'm comparing these two nearly identical concepts to one another, if I was to optimize a page, I'd say, well, let's see. I'm looking at the same monthly volume. I'm looking at relatively the same difficulty score, but this one's a little bit lower, so that's kind of nice. But here, there's clearly a big spread between how many SERP features are showing up in the home insurance premium calculator versus the home insurance rate calculator. So I would say, in this case, the lower score or the lower keyword down here, home insurance premium calculator, is the better variant of these two. Okay. All right, last but not least, let's look at example number 3. Here we have study abroad programs and best study abroad companies. Now, this is a little bit different than the other examples because these aren't just replacing one word for another, but let's imagine again, Hummingbird, thinking of contextual search, semantic search. It understands sort of the context and the relationship between different words and how they fit together. One would imagine that if there are good study abroad programs, those study abroad programs are probably delivered by study abroad companies. And so these two things, right, have kind of the same search intent. But let's look at just the difference between these keywords. This one's a little bit more challenging. Here, pretty decent monthly volume, okay, 1.7 thousand. Difficulty score of 70, it's quite high. An organic click-through rate of 52%. So I would say good monthly volume, but let's pretend that I'm a small business, right? And let's say, well, there's decent monthly volume, but I don't know. That's a very high difficulty score, and it appears there's a lot of SERP features I'm going to be contending with. So even if I battle it out and get into those top 3 results, I still might have a really hard time getting a click, right? Because there's going to be a lot of other stuff that's showing up on that page. It's going to draw the attention away from my link. So it'll be a tough slog there. Well, okay, let's look at best study abroad companies. 11 to 50. That's not a lot of search volume, right? Compared to this other guy here. Difficulty score of 40. Well, that's a lot more favorable than what we see up there. And an organic click-through rate of 100%. This means that we identified in this analysis that there were no or very few SERP features that were showing up on this search engine result page. So now which one of these is better? This is maybe more typical of a classic SEO challenge. You might have a client or an internal stakeholder that says, I want that volume, right? I see that volume score, and I want that volume. I want to go after the thing that has the more volume. But it's a lot more nuanced than that. You have to remember that search visibility figure that says, hey, most people click on those top 3 results, 3 to 5 results maybe if you want to widen that up a little bit. And you could say, if we're not going to get into those high click-through rate areas, what is the likelihood that I'm going to get any of the benefit of this volume? So sometimes you might say it's better for us to go after a lower monthly volume keyword, if that's really part of our strategy, because we have a higher likelihood with no SERP features getting in our way and maybe a difficulty score that's within reason for our domain authority and our authoritativeness on the subject, that we might actually go in there and get, into the first or second position and get 30% or 20% or so of this monthly volume. So there's a little bit of math that has to go on here when you say, if this is too challenging, both from a competitive standpoint as well as a SERP feature standpoint, I might work really hard and only get into rank position 15 or 20, of which I would expect I'd get 0 clicks. Versus here, where maybe I can get into those top 3 positions, or maybe I can even rank number 1, and where I could get maybe 30% of these. So 30% of 11, right, is better than 0% of 2,000. So it's kind of, you got to think about what the likelihood of getting those clicks is, and compare that, because a lot of people when they look at search engine optimization are just going to probably dive in and say, let's just go after the things that have the biggest volume. And the big message here is search volume alone is not always the best indicator.